Morning, this is Kevin from Map Practical. So this is the Advanced Cartographic Design Lab 4 with the Denali National Park map. And we've been talking about shaded relief. Part 1 we looked at ARC and we were able to produce this shaded relief entirely within ArcGIS. So inside of ArcMap, using just transparencies and stacking a bunch of different shaded relief layers, hypsometric tint, land cover, we get a pretty good look. So now we're going to take it to the next level and bring it into Photoshop and get something better. So let's take a quick peek over here in ARC. So we had all these different layers stacked up and there was different transparencies, but what you need to do is then go back and turn all your layers off, go down to your bottom layer, like my filtered hill shade, and make sure there's no transparency on it at all. Get the look that you're hoping for, and then go ahead and export these all out as individual layers. So it would be export map, and then put it in a folder like I'd made a relief blend, and I've already put all these through, and then just name it so it's easy to understand what it is when you're in Photoshop. So this would be the filtered, and then you do it at 300 dpi, and then you turn that one off, and then MDOW. So I ran the MDOW, didn't show that in the last video. It's just another hillshade model. Same thing though, there can't be any transparencies, right? So no transparency is all. And then the symbology is what you're looking for as far as your color ramp. Maybe it's a white to a 30% gray. You have to play with your gamma stretch and your stretch type to get what you're looking for. And it takes some experience. Over the years you kind of figured out. When you zoom in on it, look at it, it doesn't look killer. I mean, it's interesting, but what we're going to use it for is to get some texture into our overall relief stack. So don't be thrown off. And remember, you're going to be putting at least 3 hillshades together. So if it's light gray, that's fine, because as you stack it up, it'll get darker. All right. So let's go back out the whole page. Same thing for your aerial perspective. It doesn't need to be super dark. Light gray is fine, but definitely want to play with your stretches and stuff. So it's just kind of whiting out at the tops of the highest peaks. In this case, Denali and Foraker. And then the hypsometric tint is the original DEM. And you definitely got to play with that a little bit so that you don't have just one color blanketing the entire thing. The more of a color range you get out of your ramp, the better. But again, no transparency. My land cover, that is just the veg. So I went through and I got rid of all the values by looking at the key that weren't vegetation. So we have deciduous forest, coniferous forests, we've got some mosses, some tundra, things like that, and they're all kind of in that green to brown palette. I got rid of all my glaciers and my rock and all that because I already have them somewhere else. Okay. This glacial extract, I didn't actually send that out, but I did put my rocks in there. Now the rocks I took out of the raster and converted them to a vector inside of ARC, but I'm going to export them out as a raster again. So you can do that if there's no transparency. I went with a brown because the blend is going to change it to kind of a lighter blue inside of Photoshop. That's just experimentation, right? So, but when I export this one, again, it's File, Export Map, and as long as you have a TIFF chosen, then it's going to export that out as a TIFF, as a pixel raster. So don't be too put off by that. If there's any transparencies at all, though, you can have real problems. You'll end up with a banded raster that just doesn't work out so well. All right, so my moraines, those just come in as gray, and you can see that the rocks are really, covering a lot of the upper elevations in the Alaska range. We're going to take care of that when we're in Photoshop. That was one of the problems we had with it inside of the blend that we did just inside of ARC. And then the glaciers. And the glaciers are a little bit of a problem, right? They're white, so they don't show up on this white background. So you got to go inside your data frame, go to the data frame properties, and then go over to the frame tab, and then under background, change that thing to something like black. Say OK. And now you can see the glaciers, and then it'll be easy to get rid of the background color inside of Photoshop. So once you've done all that, you've sent out your all your layers as 300 dpi TIFFs, you're done inside of ArcMap. Go ahead and save it. And then we're going to go into Photoshop. So this was the original one that we had. This was just made in ARC, and we're going to make a better one now out of all those exports. So we go to File, Scripts, and then load files into stack. And what that's going to do, it's going to allow us to grab all of our TIFFs that we just sent out, and it'll put them in an individual layer for each one, all aligned over the top of each other. So we'll click on that, and then you got to browse to your folder. So here's all my relief blend, and I'm just going to grab them all. Oops, that was not what I wanted to do. Looks like I made copies of them all. Let's see here. get rid of all my copies. I think I had the wrong modifier key held down. That's okay. What I should have been holding down was, yeah, there we go, was just my control key. So aerial, tint, yep, filter, glacier, land cover, MDOW, rocks, and moraines. There we go. We don't need the debug log. And we'll load those in. And then you get the full list. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different layers that we're going to blend. And say OK. And it'll automatically line them up, make the document the size. And so this is our original 13 by 13 square with the 1/2 inch margins. So we have our 12 inch by 12 inch map. Okay, so we got all the layers over here, and now we just need to put them in the right order. So the order for me, for this particular lab, has been with the filter on the bottom, and then my MDOW above that, and then my aerial perspective above that, and then we're going to put the DEM for the hypsometric tint right over the top of that, land cover above that, and then glaciers, rock, and moraines. So there we go. Once you start this process, it's always just kind of like a process of creation. You can have differences, and there's no set formula for how it's all going to come together. You just have to take some time and enjoy what you're doing and play with it until you get the look that you're hoping for. So I get my stack right, and then I go ahead and turn off everything except for my first filter. So something you need to know in Photoshop, always make sure that the layer that you intend to be working on is selected over here. Okay? So for my first one, it's just going to remain full color, right? 0 opacity and a normal blending mode. And then the MDW over the top of it, we're going to have to blend that one. So make sure you select it in the layer palette. And I'll go over, and I think what I was using on that guy was maybe like a multiply. So these blending layers, there's all these different ones you can choose. Once you select one and the box is highlighted in blue, you can just use your arrow key to go through them and see which one you like. I know that multiply is pretty good, but maybe it's a little too much, so I can change my transparency then. Take that down to like, 50% or 40%. You can also just type these things right in here once you select them. All right, so that's a decent look. And then you can always just play the eyeball game and turn it off and on and see if you like what you're seeing. All right, and then you do your next one. So my aerial, right? And that one I think I used something along the lines of a linear burn or a lighten. All right, lighten looks pretty good. So that's lightening my highlights up in the top. But then we're going to mess with the opacity. And the opacity was somewhere around 50% or so. All right, and again, you can play the eyeball game. All right, so that helped it out. So now we get a pretty good relief, right? So that's our hillshade. Let's add a hypsometric tint to it. Make sure you select that one. If we did this one, we can change the blending mode to multiply and see what it looks like already. Not too bad. And then we can just go down through them and see which one we like. And I kind of like that linear burn, but I'll check out the other ones. Darken color, right? Oop, lighten's not so great. Some of them do really wild things. Like difference in soft light, hard light, you get totally different colors. Watch, we'll get down here to a difference and see basically it's like a negative, so it's subtracted the colors from the existing colors. That's not what we want. So I'm going to head back up, and I think linear burn is what I'm looking for. There we go. And then, of course, play with the opacity. So it's not just so saturated. I'll take that guy down, and this might go quite a bit, like down to around 30% or so. We'll start right there at 33. Okay, so already we got a pretty good look. We got more definition in there. Then we're going to take a look at our land cover. Make sure it's selected. Now we have a problem. So even if we just made this light transparent, we've got all this white, and that white is going to take away a lot of our definition in the highlands. So what we got to do is we got to make sure our land cover is selected, and then get our magic wand tool over here, right? And then we got to look at the settings up here. Contiguous means that they're all connected pixels. We want to uncheck that. So it's going to grab all the white pixels everywhere inside of the land cover. And I'm just going to hit delete. And now Control D will stop the marching ants. And now our land cover doesn't have any of that white background. So there we go. And then we're going to have to do a blending mode on that one, of course. So let's see. Maybe like a linear burn sometimes works pretty good. All right, not too bad. It's a little bit too saturated, but we can take care of that with some opacity. All right. So what if we took that one down to like 20%? Ah, now we're getting somewhere, right? So we've broken up that hypsometric tint and we've made it a little bit more interesting by giving it some texture, right? And so it's not just a ramp of color from lowlands to highlands, right? Okay, so we'll get back to that. We're going to do something else kind of neat with the land cover, but let's get into our glaciers. All right, so we have that same problem with the glaciers. As far as the background, we've got to get rid of that black. So we'll go ahead and grab our magic wand tool, and we're going to get rid of all black pixels, so non-contiguous. So select them all, hit delete. There we go. Control D will stop the marching ants, and now you just have the glaciers. So the glaciers, how did we do those guys? I think I was liking one called color dodge on this one. Because they're white, they will do different things. So if I do a color dodge with about 35 to 40% transparency, there we go. So now we can still see, if we go down, I'm going to zoom in here. You can still see the shaded relief on the glaciers, but we have a little problem. We're getting some of the green hypsometric tint coming through, and we don't want green glaciers. So how do we fix that? Well, one way to do it would be to select all those glaciers again. So if you hold down the control and then just click on this little guy, see how it gives you the marching ants right there? Click once. Now it's grabbed all the glaciers. I'm going to, with the glaciers selected, change and go down to my DEM tint, and now I'm going to be making a change to this layer, and then I'm going to hit delete, and that just deleted the DEM tinting just where the glaciers were selected. So Control D, and now we don't have any green tint on our glaciers. That's kind of nice, right? Okay, let's do a couple more things, and then we'll get back to some more moves. So the rock, let's go back out. Same problem here, right? We want to get rid of all that white background. So go ahead and Control D will unselect it. We're going to select, oh, see the problem? I'm selecting my glaciers because that's what's highlighted. So make sure you're on the layer that you want. So rock selected, select the white background, hit delete. There we go. Control D stops it. All right, a little bit too much rock. That's going to do some interesting things, but what we can try is, let's try a mixing mode like luminosity. So luminosity actually changes them from that brown to like a darker gray, and that's actually the color that they are in the real world, but we're just going to add just a little bit of them. We're going to take this opacity way down. It's like under 9%, 10%, all right? And then you can play the eyeball game to see your differences. See, it's just changing it just a little bit. Take it a little bit further down. All right, let's try that. Okay, moraines, same deal. We got to make sure it's selected. Magic wand tool. Got all the white, delete it. There we go, Control D undoes it. All right, way too much rock moraine up in the highlands, right? But so let's go ahead and multiply that. Okay, and we'll do like a 20% or so on that guy. Okay, so now you're seeing just a little bit of moraine coming down the middle of the glaciers, but it's also giving us a little bit of a mess up here at the top, right? So it's a little bit too dark. So what I was thinking is the moraines really, I only want that effect as they come down the glaciers. So what about if I got rid of some of that? So what I can do is make sure my moraines are selected. If you use this erase tool that we're about to use and you have another layer selected, then you're going to be erasing pixels that maybe you don't want to get rid of. So I'm going to go over here, grab my erase tool. You could just hit E if you wanted to. And you can change its size up here. Right, so you have different brushes. You can change its size, you can change its hardness. I'm going to move the hardness down to about 50%, size about 150 or so, somewhere in there, right? And then over here, the opacity down around 30%, flow somewhere around 30, and this just means that it won't be a hard erase, and then smoothing also down around about 30%. That means that when you start to erase, you're not going to erase all of the pixels. So now I'm just going to slowly go over the rocks and take away. And then you can mess with the eyeball to see if you're having any effect, right? Take away some of their overall power at the top of the mountain. So we're trying to get rid of some of the dark moraines at the top of the peaks. And I think if I go again and just move my hardness up, it'll help out. Okay. There we go. Now we're starting to get it. And you just kind of bring some passes over the top of it, right? The other problem I have is that the glaciers are also kind of making my top of my peaks look a little bit pixelated. So I'm going to go down to glaciers and do the same thing and take away some of these pixels up here so that my relief pops back out. And by using a non-hard brush that's just doing like semi flow, you end up not having such a hard line in between the different things that you're doing. Okay, now when I zoom out, not too bad. It'd be a good idea to save at some point, right? So we'll do a file, save, and then put this guy in here as our master relief. And you could save it as a TIFF and it will hold on to all of the layers, but when I'm working with a document that's this big and with this much styling going on, I'll go to a Photoshop document, so a .psd. And then I will go ahead and save the sRGB profile in it and hit save. Okay. Alright. So, looking pretty cool. We got a pretty good relief. Now, there's a couple of other things that we can do. So this land cover, this all represents trees, right? It's kind of flat right now. What if we were to give that a little bit of a pop and give it some texture so it looked like the treetops of the forest? So let's go down to the land cover, and if I double click on land cover, on the little thumbnail for land cover, it's going to bring up this layer style. The blending options and the transparency, we've already been working with that. But if you go down to some of these other options, like the bevel emboss, so we just hit the bevel emboss, and we're going to want to go with a let's see, inner bevel there, right? Smooth technique, and then we're going to go down to the texture and select that one. And I'm going to go ahead and grab grass, because grass is a fine texture and we're doing with a pretty small amount, and you can already see it on screen. It's kind of come together for us already. Let me just check. I got a couple of different things to look at here. Yeah, if we take the scale, we can play with it, and you'll see it on screen. And let me go ahead and say OK, and now I'll zoom in. And what you'll see is that we have turned all those trees into a little texture of trees, right? Once you've made these effects, if you just double click on them, they'll reopen and you can then work with them again. So we can mess with this scale in real time. I think this thing's pretty good at about 15, and I kind of like this depth at about 150. So what about that? And that's the texture, right? And then if you go back to the bevel emboss, you can play with their size and their depth. Let's see, what did I have set up? Size, I think I had my size even smaller, right? Let's see. There we go. So that's actually pretty good right there. And then the depth. And as you play with these things, you'll notice that it makes them even finer or greater, and then you can soften it just a hair. Alright, maybe I'll take that back. Cool, so now we've turned all of our trees into like little bump maps, and that looks pretty darn good. Okay, one last thing I want to do, I want to add one of those effects to my glaciers. So all these glaciers, they're looking okay, but they're a little bit flat. So let's take a look at all the glaciers here in the range. You're getting some of the shaded relief under them, but normally with a light source up in the upper left, as it would come across the landscape, right here on the edges of the glaciers, you would see some more shadow, right? We want these things to be a little bit 3D and to kind of pop up out of the landscape. Let's go ahead, double click on the little thumbnail there. We'll get this guy, and we're going to do a bevel emboss again, right? But we're not going to mess around with texture. This time we're just going to play with the bevel emboss, and you can see what it did. It already added like a drop shadow, but we want to change these things. So what if we move the angle up to our light source, our normal place? Great. And then the size, we're going to take that down. We're going to really move it till it's just around the edges, right? And the depth we can play with. Maybe bring it up a little bit and then soften it a hair. Maybe, there we go. Smooth, yes, we definitely want smooth. Inner bevel, yep, we want that. Or is it emboss? Emboss will kind of do the whole thing, which is okay, but you have to play with the depth then again, right? Take it away. Size, whoops, see, that's way too much. I think I don't want emboss. I think I'm just going to go with an inner bevel. There we go. And then take my size up a little bit and then smooth it out quite a bit. There we go. Now we're getting like a nice little pillow. And you can play with this light and get it just right. All right. There we go. Okay, so check it out. Now we've got our glaciers, and they look like they're coming out of the map a little bit. So that might be a little excessive. I can always go back into it and turn it down a hair if I want to. All right. Just going to take their size down a hair. There we go. So I pulled them back away from the edges a little bit. And then you can hit the little eyeball on the effect and turn it off and on and see what the difference is. Wow, so that really made my glaciers pop. Control S to save. So there you go. So, in less than a half an hour, I've gone ahead and styled out a set of TIFFs to really give us a nice shaded relief look. And let's just take a look. This is what the best we could do inside of ArcMap, and this is what we were able to pull off using blending modes and different layer effects inside of Photoshop. Alright, if you found that useful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next time out there. Thanks.